Hi, I'm Gary Striegler, the president of Craftsman Builders. We're a home building and remodeling company, and in this video today I want to share something with you that's made a massive difference in my business, and that is the way we build our closets. I call it high performance closets, and what that means is we have a way that we build our closets that one allows our clients to get the very most use out of every bit of their closet, but also it allows them to have the ability to make adjustments to the way they use their closets later on. Recently we did a closet where the client wanted me to put some little closet rods really close to the floor, and I thought, what in the world is that about? Well, I learned later on. Today you can buy hangers for boots. Apparently if you have a nice pair of boots, you don't want them to have a crease where they fold over. So she was using these hangers to store her boots close to the ground, and actually it was an amazing application. Well, if I just built a standard closet the way we used to build closets years ago, she wouldn't have had that opportunity to adjust the use of the closet to the new products that she had just found online. So that's why I call it high performance closets, the ability to use every bit of the closet now and make adjustments to the way you use the closets in the future. Now, the secret to that is having everything adjustable. So the way that we make everything adjustable is by drilling a series of 5mm shelf pin holes. And one of the best ways that I know to do that is with the Craig shelf pin jig. This is actually 3 of the jigs put together. Now, it takes a lot of holes to drill something like this, so I like to attach 3 of them together, but you could do it with just 1 jig. Here's how the jig works. So you have a drill bit that has a stop collar. You drill through, and it's going to drill almost all the way through your piece of shelving material and stop. And then once you drill a hole, they have this little pin that actually fits in the first hole that you drill so that you're able to index from there on out. And you won't have the problem with the jig sliding up and down. So once you drill the first hole, you can just index the jig off that first hole. And we'll actually show you how that works later on. But again, this jig, whether you have 3 of them put together like me or whether you just have 1, enables you to drill all these holes and give you all the adjustable function that makes these closets really work for my clients. So there's 2 things that a closet generally does, just in broad categories. The first thing is hanging storage, and then the second would be shelves. Now, I can achieve both of those functions by drilling this system of holes. Now, again, I did say you need to use the 5mm holes. At least for all the closet hardware that I use, it takes a 5mm hole. And this closet rod is the closet rod that we use. We custom cut it to size, and these little holders just fit right in those 5mm holes that we've drilled. So literally I've got a 9-foot tall closet here, and I have the ability basically every 1.25 inches or so, I'm sorry I'm not a metrics guy, but every 1.25 inches or so to put a rod anywhere I want to or a shelf anywhere I want to. And that's what really makes these closets work for my clients. Now, of course, I keep talking about my clients, but really everyone has closets in their house that could use some improvement. And so whether you're a homeowner wanting to remodel and get more value out of your closets, or whether you're a professional, this is an amazing way to do closets. So we're just going to take you step by step from laying out the closet all the way through to the finished sanding touches. And I'm also going to share with you some little tips, and there's also some other little aftermarket things that you can buy, like wardrobe rods, that can really add a little pop to your closet. So we're going to start out now by doing layout. Hi, I'm Gary Striegler, the president of Craftsman Builders. We're a home building and remodeling company, and I want to share with you something today that's made a massive difference in my business. It's the way that we do our closets. I call it high performance closets. And the reason for that is we build our closets in such a way that allows our clients to have the maximum versatility. They can use every bit of their closet now, but it also gives them the versatility to change the way that they use their closets in the future, because there's constantly things being invented and brought to market in the closet business that change the way that you might use your closets. Or it could even be as simple as something like, oh gee, I don't need to wear a suit to work anymore, so I don't need quite as much long hanging space or something. Anyway, the whole thing about the way we do our closets is based on having everything adjustable. Now, the way that I make everything adjustable is by drilling 5mm holes, and this jig is what I use to do it. Now, in a little bit, we're going to show you just how well this jig works. This is actually 3 of these jigs put together, but you can do the very same job with just one of them. Just having 3 makes it go a little bit faster. So there are 2 things that a closet does in general. One is hanging storage and the other is folding or shelf storage. Now, with the system that I do, I don't even have to decide where I'm going to put a rod or a shelf until after I've laid out the closet. But everything is adjustable, and we're able to put the rods anywhere we want to by using these little rod holders that fit in these holes that we've drilled. And then we just custom cut these pieces of rod to the length we want. And then of course we make shelves and use the little 5mm shelf pins to put a shelf anywhere we want to. But again, the great part is I don't have to decide even at the start where all that's going to go, and I can change my mind 6 months, a year, 2 or 3 years later. So it doesn't really matter whether you're a professional who wants to really kind of put your mark on the homes and the projects you do by saying we build the best closets of anybody in the area, or whether you're a homeowner that just wants to get a lot more use and improve the function of your closets. I think you're going to find this video really, really interesting. Now, we're going to start out with layout, and we're going to go all the way through how to build a closet, talk a little bit about products, different products that we use, and then we'll finish up all the way down to even how to sand projects. Then we're also going to do another section in this video, which is on probably one of my very most requested projects. There's lots of different names for it. You can call it cubby cabinets, a launching station, or whatever. But basically, it's that cabinet that you build kind of in that transitional space between the house and the garage, where you can sit down, put on, take off your shoes, put the kids' lunchbox, anything like that, hang up your coats. Just about anybody would like to have one of those in their house, and it's really simpler than you'd think once you know a few tricks with the speed of Craig joinery. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk first about layout in this closet. So today we're going to be working on a walk-in closet, but I would want to share with you that even if you don't have a walk-in closet, just by making all the shelving in your closets adjustable, you're dramatically going to increase the performance of that closet. So don't tune me out if you go, I don't have a walk-in closet. Now, the closet that we're working in has 9-foot ceilings, and so I chose to take my hanging and shelving all the way up to the ceiling. The reason for that is, for some things at 9 foot, you can just barely get 3 rows of hanging in, and that can be helpful. It can make a huge difference how much storage you get out of a closet. We normally are doing our closets out of MDF. It's a very high quality material that paints well. Very seldom do we stain a closet, so we're pretty much always working with paint grade materials. For this closet, we bought some material. It's called bullnose shelving, which is pretty regularly available. Comes in 16-foot or 12-foot pieces. And we ripped off the bullnose. That's because to really make my closets as nice as they can be to live up their full potential, I want to face frame out my closets like a piece of cabinetry. And that makes them stronger, it keeps things straighter, and it just makes things nicer. And it doesn't take that long when you see how I do it. Of course, the key to that is being able to use a Craig joint to assemble the face frame in place, and also using some pocket screws with the Craig joint to attach the face frame to the uprights. But first, let's start talking about layout. Now, I could have gone with 8 foot and just had a continuous shelf across the top, But again, I decided to go with 9 foot. Lots of homes today even have 10, 12 foot tall ceilings. So, most of the time you're going to want to take things all the way up to the ceiling. Sometimes we'll stay a foot down, but typically the taller I can go, the better. So the number one thing that I have to think about when I'm laying out a closet is, how deep do clothes really hang? So when I go into this corner over here, how much room do I allow? How do I plan for that? Because that corner is really one of the things I have to work around to make my closet function. I normally figure 24 inches for clothes hanging on a rod. They're not quite that far out, but it's close, so I just figure 24 inches. When I looked at this closet, I could tell that the most useful thing I could do would be just to line up hanging down both sides. Then I've marked out 24 inches from each corner, and that line represents where clothes are going to hang. And I'm going to have enough space, I think, to put a middle upright and 2 other uprights on this back wall. I'm probably going to use that primarily for folding things, because the folding things will only take up about 16 inches. I want to jump back just a step and tell you that where we can, we always like to make all of our shelving on our uprights 16 inches deep. So much nicer than 12 inches because, pair of folded jeans, how many things sit better on a 16-inch deep shelf, which technically is going to be about 15 as opposed to 12. Now, you can still get all the adjustability that I'm going to be talking about using 12-inch uprights, and you can get all the same function if you choose not to rip off the bullnose and leave the bullnose as a finished product, or even buy material and round over the edge and give yourself a bullnosed edge. It's just not quite as strong, not quite as nice. And I want to show you the very nicest thing that we do, so we're going to be face framing this closet out. Now, we try to stay somewhere between 30 and say 40 inches for our compartments. I want to compartmentalize every wall of the closet, and that gives me the adjustability between each compartment. So I measured this wall and found that by breaking it down into about 34.5-inch wide compartments, I'd get 3 equal compartments. Again, that's going all the way into the corner. Now, over here, things I do have to take into consideration also are light switches and the swing of doors and such. A lot of closets, the door swings into the closet. And so you have to take into consideration not only where the door might swing, but also I need a pathway to walk into that closet. So, a good closet layout takes into consideration how deep are the clothes going to be hanging, or what place might I choose to put shelves or a shoe rack, which a shoe rack usually is only 12 inches deep, or what's the walk path coming in, what kind of lighting am I going to have. So lots of things like that. But again, the number one thing is I just want to make it all adjustable so that my clients can adjust and maximize completely the use of their space. So the first thing that I did is I just made a series of marks on the wall. These marks are going to actually indicate the uprights. The next thing that I would do after that is take a long level, and I just make a pencil mark up and down that is a plumb mark with the level. Now, I also put kind of an intermediate cleat on the back wall about halfway up to help stabilize my vertical pieces. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make one plumb line here, and then I'm going to come up, since it's a 9-foot ceiling, 4'6", and I'll draw a horizontal line. That's going to be where those cleats go. Now, down at the bottom, the baseboard just holds the bottom of my upright in place. Up at the top, we put another piece of MDF that's ripped the same depth as the uprights. We nail it up against the ceiling, and that squares them up and also gives me something to nail my face frame pieces to and the top of the uprights. So first thing I'm going to do, I've already kind of laid this out for dimensions. Now I'm going to go ahead and draw some vertical lines. Again, I probably don't want to get much more than about 40 inches long, because it starts to stress the rods a little bit, the shelves, and it also just takes away from the adjustability. Now all I've got is an 8-foot level, so I'm going to mark as far as I can, and then in a minute when I bring my uprights in, I will actually get on a ladder and take it the rest of the way up. But want to start out plumb. Now of course we don't know for sure if the if the sidewalls are plumb or not. So for the first one that I do, we will just put a piece in the corner, and then we'll take measurements out this plumb line to cut all of our support pieces. So the next thing I'm going to do is measure up that 4'6", and I'll go ahead and make that line. And at that point, I'm ready to go into the other room and start milling up all the components that I use to build this side of the closet. Once I get past this very first upright and I've got it plumb, then when I cut the baseboard piece, the cleat, and the top shelf for my other components going that direction, I just cut them all the same, because if this is plumb and they're butting against it, then I don't have to change any measurements as long as I cut them all the same length, and I'll do that using a stop. Then if this one's plumb, all the cleats are the same, then the next piece is going to be plumb also. Okay, so I've got my first vertical mark, I've got the horizontal mark. Now I'm ready to go start machining out my pieces. Last thing I want to do is measure the height in here, and I'm going to measure it in several places because this floor could be off a little bit. And what I will do is cut all the pieces to the same height. I want to be probably within between 1/8 and 1/4 of the ceiling, so that I can get them to come in there, but not so tight they have to beat them in place. So 9 foot and 5/8 will work pretty well for all the uprights in this room. If I had measured those and there'd been some really dramatic difference in the height, I would have had to have adjusted the length of the uprights to basically to cut out the hump in the floor, because we want to make sure that when we come in and put those rods or shelves in there that they're running level. So I'm in good shape here. I can come just right off of this concrete slab. But if I had found some dramatic difference in those measurements, then I probably would want to take a level, put it on the floor, and make some notes about having to trim off some of my uprights. So now we're ready. We're going to go in the next room. We're going to see how do we machine and make these parts that make these adjustable closets. So one of the things about building closets is you're almost always breaking down material and cutting sheet goods or long material. So a great tool for that type of work is this plunge saw, because this is a 9-foot piece. So if I was using a table saw, I'd have to have probably 20 feet of clear floor space, a little bit of room to start the board into the saw, and then of course a little bit of room at the end of the saw to catch it. Plus, that's almost a 2-man job. Now, another kind of interesting thing that's great about a plunge saw like this is it's also really portable and a lot easier to load and unload than a table saw, and it has great dust collection. This plunge saw does come with this bag, which does a great job of catching the dust, but I've got a trigger activated vacuum, so I'm going to be using that for this project today. I think also that a saw that runs like this on this guidance track is a little bit easier to use and safer than a table saw. Basically, you do make a plunge cut in, you go the length of your track to make the cut, and then the saw comes back up so the blade is housed in a safe position. So I'm going to be taking this piece of bull nose and ripping the bull nose off, because for our closet, we're going to be face framing the closet, and I've got to get rid of that bull nose. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rip this off. Then we'll remove the track. Now, another great thing about this track is it's got clamps that quickly attach underneath, so I don't have to worry about holding it. The track does have non-skid surfaces, but for as long as I'm ripping here and as quickly as I can attach those clamps, I'd rather just have the clamps on there for this cut. So now that I've made that cut, there's a couple things I want to talk about this saw. So if you've never used a saw like this before, there's a couple things that I'd kind of like to talk about that are features. The first one is when you first get the track, this plastic guide, which is kind of helps protect from tear out, is actually a little bit wider. So the first pass that you make with the saw down the track trims it to exactly the cut line. So once I've made that cut, and actually you make that cut without cutting anything, then you know exactly where you're going to cut every time. So it's really easy to lay out. Like I just moved that guard right over to where the bullnose stopped and told me exactly where I was going to cut. All I had to do was just tighten down the two clamps and I was ready to go. Now, it is also possible to, there's an adjustment here that I can do on this saw, this knob right back here, that will make it to where the saw can't back up if I was ever to bind up and have kickback. Now, to be honest, in my experience, using this plunge saw, that's generally not a problem, but it is a nice safety feature. And of course, I can adjust, the depth up and down. You really don't want to have too much more blade showing from the bottom than you have to, but all the measurements are really clear right here on the front that tells you exactly how deep that you're going to be cutting. And of course, again, the track guides the saw. I just plunge down through and make the cut. Another thing that's nice about this plunge saw is I'd call it a right-handed saw. And what that means is, unlike other products I've used like this, I'm actually controlling the trigger and the saw with my right hand. I'm not having to do any kind of a cross-handed thing. So I control it, and then I can use my left hand just on this handle. But it's more made, at least for me as a right-handed person now. Sorry for those folks that are left-handed. I know there's a lot of left-handed carpenters out there, but this is a little more comfortable for me as a right-handed carpenter. Whether you're working on a job site, a new home, or in someone's house, dust collection really is a nice thing. Now, one of the challenges about using dust collection is, anytime you use a saw, you have to worry about the cord itself getting hung up and caught on things. And then you add the vacuum hose, and that makes it even more challenging. But this track is designed with a feature down here on the end that actually helps manage the air hose and the cord, keeps them separate, and kind of keeps them from hanging up on the edge of the track, which is really nice. So once I know what the length I need to cut and I can get everything set up, I can run up and down this board without having to worry about the cord of the saw or the air hose hanging up. So now that I've made this cut, I'm going to take the track off, and we're going to set up and drill those holes for the adjustable shelf pins and closet rod holders. So this upright that I'm cutting is a little bit over 9 feet long. Now, to make that cut, I've combined two of the tracks. One of the things I like about this track system is there are two different metal bars that tie the track together. One slides into this channel from the bottom, and then the other one comes from the top, and there's a total of 8 Allen set screws that tie the whole track together. But the good part about that is if I want to take this track apart to transport it, I just have to loosen 4 of those up and the whole thing will fit right back in the back seat of my pickup truck with the saw beside it. Now try to do that with a table saw. So here's that Craig shelf pin jig that I talked about earlier. This is actually 3 put together, but you can do everything I'm going to do with just 1. You just have to move it a little bit more often. Now this guide piece pops off, so there's 1 setting for the holes from this edge back, but if I wanted my holes to be a little further back from the edge, I would just put this edge guide over on the other side. And actually, to drill one of the sets of holes that I need to drill for this upright, I'm going to have to take these edge guides totally off. But for right now, I'm going to use this set of holes that are closer. And so here's how the jig works. I've got this bit that's got a stop guide. It's the same type of drill guide bushing that Craig uses on all their pocket hole joinery jigs. Now, the shaft of this is actually 1/4 inch, but it's been turned down to 5 millimeter for this bit. Again, 5 millimeters is what I need for this closet system. But the same jig then can drill 1/4 inch holes if you'd rather have 1/4 inch shelf pin holes, or the 5 millimeter. Again, the stop collar gives me the depth of drilling. So what I'm going to do now, I always measure down 10 1/4 from the top of my board. And what I'm doing is I'm indexing to the top edge of the jig. So it doesn't matter the holes, I can come from either edge. The distance to the first hole from the top of the jig is the same. So I can flip this thing around any way I want to. You really can't mess it up, which is a great thing about it. But to use the jig, what I'm going to do is come down, I'm going to drill the first hole, and then I actually drop this indexing pin through the hole like that, and that's going to keep the jig lined out while I drill the rest of the holes. When I get all the way down to the end, I'll lift the jig up, move down, and put that pin in the last hole that I did, and I'll just move on down the board like that. So I'm going to come up here and find that mark. I'm going to double check myself. So 10 1/4 to the top of the jig. Just drill the first hole. Now I drop this pin in with the 5 millimeter end down. So now the jig can't move. Now I just go down through here, drilling holes. Once you get the hang of it, you can drill them pretty fast. Okay, so I just drilled the last hole. Now I'm just going to lift the jig up, pull the pin out, and I come down to the last hole I did drill, slide that pin in so now everything's lined up perfectly, and I just go right back to drilling. So this will be the last set of holes I need to drill because I want to stop around 10 or 11 inches up from the bottom of the floor. I'm not going to put anything down below that. So I'm just going to finish drilling this. Then I'm going to unclamp the board, flip it end for end, and I'll start coming from here back, drilling the back set of holes. So I'm just going to unclamp the piece and flip it end for end. I think I'm going to have to change out the battery on my drill too. So this is the same procedure. I've come down that 10 1/4 and I've just got the top of the jig on the 10 1/4. I'm going to drill the first hole. I just drop the pin in. We're just going to work our way back this way. Now, what you do have to keep track of, because there's that third row of holes, is whether you need to make a left or a right. The other thing that I always do too is I want to make an arrow that points to what the top is. You wouldn't think it, but I hate to confess it, but a couple times while I've been really busy trying to get a closet built out quickly, I flipped one of these and got it in upside down. Well, at that point, when you put that first rod in, it might be running at an inch out of level or something. So putting an arrow there really helps me. Now, this piece is actually going to have holes drilled from both sides. And that's because it's one of the middle partitions where it's going to have closet rods and shelves coming into it from both sides. But if it's going to be one for the left of a closet run or the right, you need to make sure you keep track of that. And again, putting an arrow with the top, and once you've done one or two, you'll realize, oh, this is the left, this is the right. Going a lot better with the new battery. Okay, so I finished drilling the front and the back set of holes. So now that I've drilled the front set of holes and the back set of holes, I need to drill the set of holes that the closet rod actually fits in, and it's going to be 11 inches off of the back. Now, I could just even maybe draw a line or something down through here, But what I want to do, because that's going to make it a lot easier for me, is I'm actually going to take my track from my plunge saw and clamp it in so that I can let the edge of this guide just ride against it as I go down drilling the holes. But I want the center of these holes to be 11 inches off what's going to be the back wall. So it's going to take me just a minute to set that up, but I'm going to go ahead and get it set up with the plunge saw track as my guide. So I'm set up to drill that third row of holes. I've removed the edge guide pieces and set them aside. And what I did is flipped around the plunge saw track opposite the way you normally use it. So I'm actually butting my jig up against the thick edge of the track, and that gives me a great guide. Now I'm still going to measure down 10 1/4 from the top to the top of my jig. And by the way, if I wasn't going to drill this all the way through, this would be a right, because this is the top, and so that would make this row of shelf pin holes for the closet rod away from the back wall. So from here on, it's pretty much just like what we've done before. I'm going to drill this top hole, drop in the pin, and just keep on drilling. So that's the last of the holes for this side. What I need to do now is take the track off. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over, and since I've already got the edge guides off of this jig, I'm going to go ahead and drill this middle row. Of course, I'm going to be needing to drill multiple pieces, so I'll probably go ahead and drill most of the middle holes while I've got the edge guide off there. You know, that can save you a little bit of time, or if you get a little bit anxious like me and you want to see something happening, you could go ahead and drill a couple of them and go ahead and put the pieces up. But at any rate, most important thing for me to do right now, since this is a through, is to flip it over and make sure I get my marks 10 1/4 down from the same edge that's the top. And I'm going to put another arrow pointed at the top on that side too. So now I'm ready to actually start building the closet, bringing all the components together. Now, there's one thing that I forgot to show you when we were milling all the other components in the other room, and that is we've gone back and drilled these smaller holes, these, I believe they're called the micro holes, and those are the holes I'm going to use to actually attach the face frame members to these verticals. Of course, we will actually have to build the face frame in place because this is way too big. If I tried to build this face frame in another room and bring it down, it wouldn't fit through the door. So we have a very specific method we're going to use to build it in place. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the uprights in place across here. Then we'll come back and start building the face frame. But I did want to point out that we've drilled these holes somewhere between every 16 or 20 inches. And the thing that's important is we made sure that we drilled them in between our pocket screw holes. Now, they do make plugs that you could go back and plug those holes, but I think that's probably not worth the effort doing that, because once the clothes and things are in the closet, you'll never see them. I did go ahead and use the smaller micro hole just so it wouldn't be quite as big of a hole. But at any rate, I'm ready. I've actually gone ahead and nailed my first piece in place, nailing it into the framing. You know, there's always framing in the back corner. You also can count on framing at the top where there's a double plate behind the sheetrock, and at the bottom where you have a plate at the floor, at least in any house that's been built in the last 50 years. So now that I have this upright in place, I took a measurement from the corner over to this line, and I've cut this piece of MDF material. It's the same width as the uprights, and it's going to become the top of that closet section. I'm just going to nail it in place. And I'm using a 2.5 inch angled finish nail for this. Some people might just use a 2 inch, even an 18 gauge, but I've always would rather have a little extra nailing holding power. Now, I want to try to make sure this outside edge is as close to flush as possible. Real close to hitting a ceiling joist there. I think I got it with the last shot. Yeah, there we go. So now that this piece is in place, I can go ahead and swing my other upright in. Now, as it turned out, this corner was very, very square. My top piece had been cut square, so when I slid it in, it made good contact all the way. If this corner had been a little more out of square, which it actually normally is, I would have probably taken one of these little bitty thin shims and just slid it behind the upright to bring it out to make good contact with that top piece that I put in. So the next thing that I want to do, I'm going to swing this ladder back out of my way, and I'm going to put in this mid-horizontal piece, and I'll put in the baseboard piece, and then at that point I'll actually bring in the other upright. I'm just going to put this right up underneath that line that I drew. I can see the stud there, and if I pull back on that, I'll know for sure that I hit the stud. Shot in the corner. Now I'm just going to drop down and put my piece of baseboard in. Now this is just kind of good general information, but you know, if you're ever nailing any of these things in, especially a piece of baseboard, and your nail gun kind of kicks back and the nail bends, you need to be really, really careful, because what that means is you've hit one of those metal plates that they put in the wall to protect the pipes. So don't just keep, you know, shooting or try and drill a hole or anything like that. You're probably just going to have to maybe glue that piece on the sheetrock or something, but you want to be very, very careful not to shoot a nail. If you're hitting metal, just stop and use some glue or something. So I've got these three pieces in place. This is one of our through uprights. So I'm just going to swing it over. Again, I want to make absolutely certain that that arrow's pointing to the ceiling. And I've also put them in the wall backwards before. I need to make sure that this set of holes for the closet rod is turned out away from the wall. Now, because we took measurements earlier and these all look pretty close to the same length, I don't have to worry about any kind of hump in the floor or anything, so I can just swing this in, leave it right down the floor, and nail it in place. And although there's a little bit of bow in the wall, unless it gets to be about 1/4 of an inch or so, I'm not going to worry about it. Again, once the clothes are in here, it's not going to matter. We've got a really good painter we use. If it's a small gap, he's going to caulk it. If it gets to be a really big gap, I'll either take my plunge saw, set the track on exactly how much I need to move, and make a scribe cut, or do it with a hand planer. But probably the safest bet is that plunge saw, because remember, the edge of that plunge saw track shows me exactly where I'm going to cut. So if I needed to take 1/4 inch to nothing off this upright on 3 feet, I could put a couple pencil marks, take it back to the plunge saw, and just line that edge of that track up, and I'd get exactly the cut I needed. So a plunge saw can be really handy for scribing too. So that upright's in place. Now I'm just going to measure over to my next mark, which is back here. Since I know that that first upright's plumb, whatever this mark is, I will just cut my top piece, this middle rail, and the baseboard, all three that same length, because if that's plumb and I put 3 boards against it, they're the same length, I'm going to end up with this piece plumb. So I've got Jesse help me in the other room, so I'm just going to yell at him. Okay, Jesse, we want them all to be 34 7/8. So I'll need a baseboard piece, a top shelf piece, and a cleat, 34 7/8, please. So I'll just slip this next piece in. I can pretty well nail at the back wall, because we know that, you know, they had to have something up there to nail that sheetrock to. So if they had something to nail the sheetrock to, I should be pretty good to nail what I need to nail in there also. Okay. So I'll drop in my intermediate piece. And my baseboard. I'm just looking to make absolutely sure that I've got the arrow pointing out. And I turn that set of holes for the closet rod out away from the wall. So now I need to actually put this upright in the corner because it may be out of plumb a little bit. The corner may be. We'll put that upright in the corner, and then I'll actually take measurements at the top, middle, and bottom. Give Jesse those measurements so he can cut those pieces for me. Okay, Jesse, I'll have the on the baseboard, 34 3/4. On that intermediate cleat, well, 34 made just 3/4 shy. Let me get up here and see what we got at the top. Now, bear with that. 34 we better not go more than 5/8 on that top. And if you would cut me the top first, okay? Thanks. So I've got a little bit of a bump out in the wall, and this isn't flushing out up here. So I am going to take this to the plunge saw and just lay the track on there. I just marked what I need to take off here. I'm just going to go make this cut real quick, and I'll be right back. Well, I'm definitely glad that I did not have Jesse cut this exactly the same length as those other pieces, or I would have never gotten it in. So I've got all these pieces nailed in place now. The next thing I want to do is start working on building this face frame. Now on these two middle uprights, the face frame is going to need to center. So I'm going to need to use my multi-mark as a guide to make sure I keep that centered. On the two sides, they're just going to go tight against the wall. So when I had Jesse cutting the piece, I said make sure he's got at least two that are straight, because these out here need to be straight to actually help keep these pieces lined up. The ones at the wall, because our uprights are nailed to the wall, could be crooked, and when I push them over and screw them in place, then they'll straighten out. Now, as I build, I'm going to run the stiles, the vertical members of this frame I'm going to build all the way through, and then we're going to cut the rails to fit in between them. The rails will nail to that piece of MDF I put on the ceiling, but then we're going to use a pocket screw to make a really strong joint on their bottom edge. You can't get two screws in there, but I can get one, and that'll give me a really good joint. Now, every time I talk about face frames, I just like to be super quick and say a couple things. Whenever you're working with material to make a face frame, you want to make sure that you have good clean edges, that they're square edges, that you cut all your pieces at 90 degrees, and it really helps if everything's the same thickness. That's going to give you the best joints possible. And of course, remember that you want the screws going into the edge grain of the wood, so you drill your holes into the end of the board. So just some good basic things about pocket hole joinery to make sure that you get the best results. So I'm actually going to put a little bit of glue on these uprights as I go. Now I'm going to just tack those uprights in place with just a very few 21 gauge pins just to hold them in place until I can get the screws in there. And that'll make it easier for me to keep it centered also. I'm going to start on that side. So I will put the first two in, then we'll take a measurement and cut that top rail, and then we'll just keep moving over. Why don't you see if you can get me a refill on that glue bottle too. So this material that I'm using is poplar, and I really like using poplar for things like this because it's strong and it holds a screw very well. Of course, we mill it ourselves, but I mean, you can just buy pieces also from a big box store. Now, the most important thing though is, the most important thing is it has good square edges and it's all the same thickness and smooth. So we do all that by running it through a planer, but you can just buy material from, like I said, from one of the big box stores, and they'll have already done all that for you. Just pay a little bit more. Okay, now that I've got my gauge set, I'm just going to move over, put a headless pin there, maybe one up a little bit higher. Now I've got these pinned at the top, and to get down to the ground on them. So I'm going to get up there and get that top measurement so Jesse can be getting the piece cut for me while I'm screwing these on. Look at that, just showed up with a full glue bottle. That's fantastic. $33 1/8, Jesse. So I'm going to go ahead and start screwing through these partitions, these uprights in the face frame, and I have to use the slightly smaller head screws because I drilled the smaller holes to have less of a hole to show. I'm just going to run them in like that real quick. And to my way of thinking, that's pretty much giving me the strongest possible joint that I can get between my upright and the face frame piece. And it's going to suck it up by the time we put glue on there. Another nice thing about that pocket screw is it actually pulls the two pieces together. Now, it would be kind of difficult. You know, we talked about possibly using 12-inch uprights. This would be real borderline. I'd probably have to go to a shorter driver if this was only 12, because 12 inches would be like 11 and a half or something. You can't see the back side of this, but this board's a little bit bowed, and the pocket screws are just doing a fantastic job of pulling it up tight. Now I'm realizing that I probably need to go back. I don't think I nailed the back corner of this, but I don't think I ever nailed out here at the front. I can see based on where this stud is that there's another stud back there, so I'm going to back up for a second, grab my nailer, and put a few nails in that to make sure that's pulled over close to the wall. Of course, because I've been using nailers for years, I can literally tell by the way that sounds when I'm hitting that, hitting the stud back there. Okay, now so this is the piece that Jesse's got for me. So just got a single pocket screw, and that's because when I put it in place, I won't be able to get to anything but this bottom hole up there. So I'm going to throw my ladder back in the corner. It's kind of tight corners here. Take some glue with me. Hey Jesse, the face frame clamp, maybe even the one you're using, I need the face frame clamp, please. Kind of hard. Unless you really got a full bottle of glue to get it up there, right up on the ceiling. Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm just gonna, it's just the way I want it. Jesse did a great job cutting that. Just barely had to tap it to get it in. I'm gonna put the face frame clamp right up there. Just have to kind of reach up behind, put that one screw in. Swing back here. Now all this material, all this material was run through the planer, so it's very, very smooth on the front, but we'll still run over it lightly with a sander. Up here against the ceiling, we're going to need to use a detail sander. Basically, it'll be a little triangular sander on a multi-tool because we don't want to get up here with a random orbit sander and nick the ceiling. So I've got the piece in. We've made the strong joint at the bottom with the pocket screws. I'm just going to come in the top and shoot a few of these 21 gauge pins back into the top of the shelving, just to make sure that that's solid. So now I'm ready to go over, spread some glue on the next one. Again, I'm going to center my face frame piece on the upright with a multi-mark, and we'll repeat the same process. I'll use my multi-mark again to get it right where I want it. So the multi-mark, the tip of the multi-mark is just indexing off of the upright. All right, I'm going to get this measurement for Jesse while we're at it here. This one's, boy, it's 33 and a strong 7/8. So when I'm laying these out, I don't generally go to the trouble, unless there's going to be a whole bunch of shelves in it, of trying to get things exactly the same width. I just want to get them real close. So we're, probably within, I don't know even how much those dip measurements were, a quarter or half or something like that. All right, just going to start back with my screws. Which I think set up on this side. Right now, there's not anything other than just the board making contact. Other than the board making contact with the floor, there's nothing really anchoring the bottom of that. So what we'll need to do is come back and put a framing square against the wall and square up the bottom of these units. Now, if this was on a wooden subfloor, and it's a great application, I would have just put a pocket screw hole in the bottom so we could just drive a pocket screw hole down into the wooden subfloor to square it up. Here, because we've got a concrete slab, we'll have to use a small metal L bracket that will tap or use some kind of concrete fastener in the slab and then screw into the side of these uprights. But you definitely want to make sure that you get them squared up, and make sure you do it before you get floor covering in here, because once they try and put floor covering in here, then you'll have a real mess trying to square them up. Go ahead and so I can just put a little bit of glue on this, probably easier than trying to put it on the top of that MDF. So I'll just put a little thin bead. Hopefully it's going to work better. Of course, I glued that without checking to see if it was going to fit or not. I got a lot of confidence in Jesse. Looks like it's going to work, Jesse. I'm just barely tapping it. One thing you do need to be careful about when you're tapping on a board like that, you actually want to tap on the back edge, not the front, because if you did happen to ding it, you wouldn't want to ding it up where it was going to affect the joint. Okay, guess Jess, I'll hand these back to you one more time. You hand me that nailer since you're here handy. Save the old man a trip up and down the, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna say one more thing. So I'm staying with a really small top rail across here because we're going to really work hard to get 3 rows of hanging in some places and such, which means that we're going to block out. There's some fold down wardrobe lifts that I can get from my supplier. So the narrower this top rail is, the more room I have for that pull down wardrobe lift. If we're going to put crown mold or something here, we need to make this top rail probably a little bit wider. So I can also see that I forgot to nail this side off. I'm going to do that real quick so it's not flopping around. There it is. All right. Thank you. This measurement up here. 32 9/16. Just seems way easier than trying to put it on. There we go. Thank you. Man, it's still pretty styled. A really tight fit. So we built this section. Now there's a couple other parts of the closet that we need to build, but we're going to use exactly the same techniques. On this wall, we're going to go ahead and do a shoe rack. So that'll only be 12-inch deep stuff, but we're going to cut, of course, a whole lot of shelves for it. Then over here, we're probably going to plan on shelves that would just stay 16 inches deep, but we wouldn't hang clothes on so that that doesn't make the dead corner too much worse. But again, all this just the same techniques. Now we'll need to go back and sand these. We've already talked about making sure that we square up the bottom with some anchoring system, whether it be on a wood subfloor or a slab. Then the last thing that I want to show you is just a couple of options on shelves. But I think we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of sanding and stuff. Then we're going to come back and take a look at those shelf options. So there's a lot of specialty things that you can put in a closet to really help us function. Now, we started out talking about like these little rod holders and this oval rod, and I get those from CSH, which stands for Custom Service Hardware. They're a great company. There's probably other sources you could find too. I've got in my other hand a kind of interesting little, this is something that we use a lot. It's called a wardrobe rod, and it mounts to the side. I would have to have put like a solid block here to make it work, but you mount it to the side of your upright, and then say if you have all your ironing or you're packing for a trip and you're pulling out clothes that you want to pack, you just pull this wardrobe rod out or valet rod, and you can hang all the clothes on it, either if you're putting them up or getting them out. Then when you're through, you just push it back in there out of the way. So these are really a neat thing. There's tie racks that pull out. There's belt racks. There's all kinds of different things that are available. Another one that we use a whole lot is called a wardrobe lift. And basically what it is a closet rod that comes from the top down. You have a bar that you can grab so you can have clothes hanging right up next to the ceiling. And we're going to use several of those in this closet. And it allows you to either have a third row of hanging on something like this, or if you don't want to do that, it can make it to where your shelves can be right here where they're handy instead of way up at the top. So those are just some of the things. There's lots of different things, and who knows what's going to be available in the future. But one thing's for sure, because we're making everything adjustable, we're going to be ready for whatever it is. Now, The last thing that I want to cover and talk about are shelves. There's certainly a lot of different ways to make shelves. This is just a simple bullnose shelf, and that's certainly going to be the quickest thing to make. This one actually has some extra strength because this is 34, a little over 34 inches long, and that starts to concern me about having a shelf that long because it might warp. So what I actually did on this one, if I can get it out without causing a total wreck, I just quickly pocket screwed a cleat to the back of it. You can see where the glue is oozing out and everything. Now the reason I did it to the back is because I can leave this bullnose look, that's kind of a finished look, and turn those pocket screws to the back wall, and without doing a lot of sanding and everything, get a stronger shelf and also do it rather quickly. Now, of course, the nicest shelves are a shelf like this that has a nosing on it. And this is nice and sanded. It's got rounded over corners on the nosing. We have even a few times put like a nice molding on the front that has even more of a design. But this is certainly the nicest way to go. It matches well with the other things we've done to make this closet look like cabinetry. And on it, I just use pocket screws to attach the nosing, one about every 6 or 8 inches. That's probably about the strongest way that I know of that I can make that joint between this nosing and this piece of MDF. And also, basically, once the last screw is driven, then I'm in good shape to start doing a little bit of sanding. Now, another just quick thing I wanted to share about these shelves that are nosed like this. This is something we discovered one time. If I take this shelf pin, and what we typically use are just these little spoon shelf pins. If I take this back one and move it up one hole, and this is something that we would typically do like on a shoe rack, or some people will even on their shelves have things that sit in tubs that they want to look at. So because we have this nosed and because we nose this, I can put this shelf in here. I'll get it behind the base frame. And it'll sit at an angle. Actually, I'm going to pop this up one more hole back here, just so you can see it. But this is one of the really nice things about making these adjustable shelves. If I wanted to have shoes or something, or even a tub that I could see into, just by offsetting those pins, I can put it on an angle. So for shorter runs, I might be able to get by with just a bullnose shelf. That's certainly the fastest, cheapest thing to do. Once you get a little bit longer, or if you want things to really look nice, nosing the shelves or adding a cleat to a bullnose shelf is a great way to go. But yeah, I really like the deep shelves where I can get them because I can store more on them. So that's pretty well, I think, everything that I can share with you about how you can take a closet and really turn into the best, most useful client, whether it's for yourself or for a client if you're doing this professionally.